Notre Dame just reset nearly its entire defensive staff, and they made a late pivot at quarterback in 2027. So, what does it all mean for this recruiting class? We're talking about it coming up next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome in to Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak, Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and today is Wednesday, February 18th, and thanks as always for making this your first watch or listen of the day. If you are watching along on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. We are closing in on 15,000 subscribers, and it would really mean a lot if you helped us get there. Or if you're listening to the podcast, please just give us a follow on your preferred platform. And don't forget to submit your questions for the Friday mailbag. It returns this week, and you can drop them in the YouTube comments, or you can hit me on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so today we are diving deep into Notre Dame recruiting at a pretty interesting time on the calendar. The Irish have overhauled their entire defensive staff damn near. Junior Day is right around the corner, and the 2027 quarterback board is starting to take shape in a big way after a pretty big reset late in the process. To break it all down, I'm going to be joined by recruiting analyst Eric Thomas from Irish Illustrated, a great friend of the show. And we're going to start with what the staff changes have meant on the trail and whether Notre Dame is tracking toward another spring surge like they did last year. Then we're going to pivot to the quarterback dominoes that could define this class and close things out with updates on key blue chip targets across the country. All right, I'm excited to welcome back recruiting analyst Eric Thomas from Irish Illustrated. And Eric, since the last time we had you on, Notre Dame has basically had to overhaul its entire defensive staff with the departures of Mike Mickens, Al Washington, and Max Bulla. What has the fallout been on the recruiting trail?
Yeah, well, the easy one to point to is the exit of Bulla sort of expedited the end of the relationship between Ellis McGaskin and Notre Dame. So obviously he decommitted. I think that was something that, based on his desire to take visits and kind of look around, that was probably coming anyway. But I think Bulla's exit probably pushed the door a little bit closer. Beyond that, what we've seen a lot on the recruiting side is just sort of like, I guess you'd call it instability from change, right? And this is normal. It's not targeting these guys. Basically, with recruits, they look at it as a relationships-based business. So for them to have their point of contact, and for Al Washington, obviously that could have been with linebackers for a small period. That could have been with the defensive line for a longer period. You have Bulla in there as well. And then obviously Mike Mickens is kind of an island of his own, right? Like, some of these relationships are just so, like, Notre Dame really tailored them to the forefront of the search that it does cause a little bit of pause. It does cause them to reevaluate, where does my relationship with Notre Dame actually stand? Because this was the face of that relationship to me. So I think at linebacker, we've seen a little bit of an adjustment of board 2.0 that was probably coming anyway. They're setting up, there's having some new offers go out. And I think that was always kind of an intention for them in this class, because obviously you have Amari Irvin already committed. They lost McGaskin. They were looking to get to a third. And now that they need to, cross two guys to get there, they are going to need to extend more offers. There's been other guys that they've been involved with throughout the course of this process, but there's really not a ton of activity in the linebacker ranks that seems to be moving in their direction. Like top target, Caden Henderson out of Tampa, he's probably not going to end up at Notre Dame. So there's definitely a lot of work there. On the defensive line, it's been more of like, we saw it with like Marcus Factu, right? Like, okay, I'm not sure what's going on here. We have a new relationship with the coaches. I got to build that. And on the defensive backfield, the fallout has been more about like, hey, how do we keep the guys we have committed locked in? And then how do we go about trying to build on that still? Because we obviously have two great classes of DBs back-to-back that already signed. And now we're trying to add on to that in 2027. So realistically, from Notre Dame's perspective, is how do we, with a new coach in place, how do we retain these guys that we fought hard to land, that we think are going to add to that unit? And then how do we continue to make gains off of that meaningfully add not only to that group, but to the overall group of defensive backs at Notre Dame based on what we've signed in the last two classes? And, Coach Henry jumped right in. He really connected right away with not only the guys he had to that were committed, but he went after 5 stars right away. He was making calls like Joshua Dobson. Like, he's been very aggressive about owning that role and understanding what his place is at Notre Dame as a recruiter to start, how there's kind of a set target list. I think they've done a pretty good job of attacking that, but the thing is now just setting up those relationships, right?
Right. If it's any consolation, Mike Mickens already did a lot of the work in landing 3 commitments in the defensive backfield. I mean, they got Xavier Hassan, Ace Alston, and then Khalil Terry. So the majority of the work is already done. Now, obviously, Notre Dame has to work hard to retain them because we're still a long way away from signing day. But the fact that he was able to get this far with those high-end recruits before he left is certainly a good sign for the Notre Dame defense. But when you talk to recruits or sources around the program, what are the early returns on the new defensive assistants like Aaron Henry, Brian Jean Marie, and Charlie Partridge? Like, do you think they're gaining traction quickly, or are there any early signs that one of those guys that stand out?
I think they are gaining traction pretty quickly. I mean, all of those guys had reputations as good recruiters. Now that's relative, right? Like Charlie Partridge is known as like an ace recruiter who's been everywhere, had to recruit guys to Pitt and do more with less. Aaron Henry had kind of a similar deal at Illinois where he wasn't necessarily getting all the 4 and 5 star guys, but he was getting productive players and was fighting hard to get them to Champaign. Brian Jean Marie, like he's kind of established, right? He's been at blue blood schools. He's recruited at that level. And I think the early returns for all of these guys has been, one, a lot of recruits who are like, okay, I just lost my point of connection. I'm excited to build this relationship. And 2, hearing those conversations sort of after that introductory point, a lot of the feedback has been like, it exceeded my expectations. I think that they're different than the person I saw before, I knew before, but the way they go about things is exciting to me. Like, I think it was Fakatu came out and said, like, after he met Coach Partridge, he was like, yeah, it's obviously different from Coach Washington, but I really appreciate him. And I appreciate how knowledgeable he is. And knowledgeable is a word that has come up several times for all 3 of these guys. I think that there is a level of credibility here with them. And I'm not saying there wasn't before, but obviously when there's a lack of familiarity, credibility is the bridge to kind of get there, right? So I think that for these guys, like, they have enough clout as recruiters and as coaches that they've really been able to hit the ground running and build a rapport with some of these recruits. And the early feedback I'm getting is that folks really like these guys. They're interested in building a relationship with them. They're not necessarily like they met the guy once, like, oh, I'm going to go play for him. I'm going to run through a wall. Like, I'm not saying they're superstars here. They might not be the Mike Mickens, right? But these are great coaches. They're great recruiters, and they're building these relationships the right way. So Notre Dame is going to have a chance for some of these top targets in, March, April, May, June.
Speaking of March, April, May, June, when you look at where things stand with the class of 2027 heading into, a critical junior day in March, does it feel like Notre Dame is following a similar timetable to last year? Because, around this time, the Irish were in the midst of a relatively quiet stretch before landing several major commitments in the spring, and then they obviously surged again during the summer official visit period. So do you see a similar buildup happening here?
Yeah, it might not be as delayed as the last one was, as last year's, because obviously we remember, like, there was the period of panic, and then all of a sudden they got real hot, and then they scheduled a lot of visits and then rescheduled like half those visits, so they were all in 2 weekends for the official visit weekend, right? It was all like one sprint. I don't know that we're going to see that same condensed period at the back end, because they've already started to schedule some visits for a little bit earlier in June. Obviously, like, I'm not even tracking them on the site yet because they're subject to change. Like, they could very well go back to that push, but it does seem like the official visit schedule might be a little bit more normalized this year compared to last year. But other than that, I do think it's pretty similar, right? Like, they were a little bit later in the spring cycle here, or the late winter cycle, I guess, going into spring, getting a lot of their visits announced. Other schools had it start really rolling out in earnest about 2 weeks before Notre Dame did, when all of a sudden Notre Dame started picking up at volume, right? They're taking their time with these new coaches. They're building the relationships. They're talking to guys. So they are working a little bit more patiently and on their own time, just like last year. They're ensuring that they're not setting up these visits before they're certain about what the mutual interest is, right? Like, Notre Dame is really making sure that if they're pushing to get you on campus, they think there's a real chance that they could land you off of that trip. So they're kind of setting up a really strong foundation for a lot of these visits and these relationships moving forward with some new faces in town. And I think that the biggest thing that's going to reflect last year is the aggression. I don't think it would be a surprise to see Notre Dame go through this spring period and schedule a bunch of visits and then see a couple of those fall off as guys maybe get assessed on the board or guys, commit elsewhere, just like last year. But ultimately, what's going to come through is Notre Dame's going to have a bulk of official visits that they are going to push hard to close on. And I think even with these new staff members, with the football operations staff pretty consistent from last year and even expanded, I do think they're going to be really effective at closing on official visits again. I think that they're going to be able to, really move the needle with getting guys on campus, and they're doing the right things now to kind of set that up the same way they did last year. So it kind of falls in process, right?
We're going to be right back with Eric Thomas to break down Notre Dame's evolving 2027 quarterback board, especially after that late change of plans. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about an amazing opportunity courtesy of FanDuel. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience. And I love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It adds that layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can your pick cash, but it could also send you to the finals. Before the season, I picked the Denver Nuggets to win the NBA Finals. And even though the OKC Thunder have looked terrific this year, I'm going to stick with my pick. And right now, you can get them at plus 550 on FanDuel. And if they can somehow just get by the Thunder in the Western Conference, they're going to be heavily favored in the finals no matter who they face from the East. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Today's episode is also brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for sponsored jobs. Let's talk quarterbacks. Now that Teddy Gerard is officially signed to Notre Dame's class of 2026 and will enroll this summer, the staff had to pivot on its quarterback plans in the 2027 class fairly late in the process, and you could even make the case that they were already starting pretty late to begin with before they got the commitment of Teddy Gerard. But despite that shift, the Irish are in on multiple high-level quarterbacks right now. So from your perspective, is the strategy here to sort of cast a wide net and see who jumps in first, or do you believe there's like a clear pecking order in terms of who they are prioritizing at quarterback?
I was kind of leaning more towards the former when it was just Mons offered, because we knew they were talking to Davidson and Camden Lopati, but it seemed pretty clear that the preference was Mons. He has the offer. These two guys are sort of in conversation. They're keeping them warm. But now that they've extended these offers, I actually think that it's more of a top trio. There may still be a slight preference individual or whatever to Mons in the office or in the facility, but in terms of actually taking their commitment, I think Notre Dame is warm enough with any of these guys that if they wanted to move at that speed to move to a commitment, Notre Dame would be willing to do that dance with them. Now, the sort of good thing here for Notre Dame is I don't get the sense that any of those three guys are trying to jump into a decision and kind of put Notre Dame in that spot. Now, we've all followed this long enough to know one good visit, all of a sudden it's oh, well, I'm home. So that can be what it is. But Davidson is still working on getting his visit to campus set up, but he's going to do so. I talked to Lopati last night. He is planning to visit Notre Dame. There's obviously some considerations there with Illinois, and he wants to be respectful. And I actually really appreciated that part of the conversation because he was talking about how like it's an ongoing thing between the school and his family and whatever. But I expect him to be at Notre Dame as well. So once they get all three of those guys on campus, I think it's going to be a little bit more of like, okay, how did those meetings go? Where do we feel we're going to push the most? Who do we feel did the best on the whiteboard? Things like that. And then it's going to be a little bit more of a push. But I do think at this point, if any one of those guys hit the gas enough that they wanted to move toward a commitment, Notre Dame would reciprocate that.
When you look at Champ Mons, specifically the four-star quarterback out of Vero Beach, Florida, he's been a little bit of a late riser in the recruiting rankings. He's currently ranked 17th among quarterbacks in the 24/7 Sports Composite. So do you think that rating is appropriate for him, or do you expect him to continue climbing as he plays out his senior year?
Yeah, I think he'll keep climbing. I mean, part of the reason for that ranking is he was hurt last year. I think he only played 5-6 games. Now, he did come back, or his sophomore year, he only played like 5 or 6 games. He's obviously a reclassified player, so he's losing a year of data with that injury. He did just get back to a state championship and, had the team with what he could do last year. It looked really good. But again, it's when you have that second year and then you reclassify, you're really cutting off the amount of data that's available to you. So ranking for him is going to be a weird thing for at least, this next few months up until next season, because what are you going to do in the offseason that's going to offset a year of cut development and a lost sophomore year by and large, right? It's just a difficult spot. But his ranking aside, the talent is clear. Like, this is a dude who stepped in and immediately, like as a freshman, earned that starting job and looked competent, looked capable. And then this year as a sophomore, even when he was hurt, like when he was playing, he looked really good. And in the pouring rain of that state title game against Noah Grubbs and company, like he looked pretty good, all things considered. He was actually probably the better of the two quarterbacks. I think Noah threw more touchdowns, but Mons was a little bit more consistent in the game.
Yeah, including the most important one.
Yeah, exactly. He didn't have the same turnovers. Now, he did run out of the back of the end zone for the most questionable safety with under like 30 seconds or whatever I've seen, but that was a coaching decision. So, I think that with Mons, he's got a big arm. He's accurate. He's shown a clear capability to apply coaching to what he's doing, even if the sample size was small in the sophomore season. Like, we were able to see some of the finer points of what he worked on last offseason kind of come through quickly. So I think Mons has a ton of upside that's different from his ranking. His composite might be a little bit more reflective if you want to project through the injury, right? He's a good quarterback, man. He's a really good quarterback.
Lopati's interesting to me because he's a top 150 player on the composite. So, he's got a higher ranking, but Notre Dame offered Mons first. And I think the fact that he's committed to Illinois kind of reminds me of Kenny Minchey when Notre Dame pursued Minchey late in the process. Now, that was much, much later than they're going after Lopati here, but he's committed to a school like Illinois, where I'm sure the Illini are thrilled to have a quarterback ranked this high committed to their school, whereas Notre Dame, it's kind of like more of a backup option here, but it still seems like Notre Dame sees him as a priority. So how did this all come together with Lopati late in the process?
Yeah, he's a guy. Notre Dame's had interest, or at least there's been a level of interest between the two for a while. Like, he visited Notre Dame twice in 2025. He's camped there in the past. He told me last night that Notre Dame is kind of a dream offer for him. Now, he did mention that the ultimate dream school was Navy, and Navy never came calling or anything. So I asked him, I was like, so next best
you
thing,
want to play Navy?
Yeah. And he's like, yeah. So he did mention it's important for him and his family. Like, they love everything Notre Dame stands for as like an academic institution, as a football program, as a religious place. And so for that side of things, I think there was always a level of interest. And for Notre Dame's side, look, Camden he's a kid out of Utah, right? So there's always going to be a little bit more projection when you're going outside the top talent states. At some point, there's just a fall off of the guys you're playing with. But as a talent himself, he fits a lot of what Notre Dame wants to do. He's got great touch on the ball. He's able to push the ball downfield. He's able to really attack zone defenses and attack space, I should say, within zone defenses and get guys opportunities after the catch, which is like what Mike Denbrock wants to do, right? He wants to find areas in zone and give you a lane to drop the ball in. So that's what Lopati does. He's a dual threat, quote unquote, but he's not like, he's more of like a design run threat than a scrambling threat. In that he can scramble. He's good at it, but he's more likely to keep his eyes up and find a target downfield than he is to just tuck the ball and run. Whereas on designed runs, he's going to be physical. He's going to be able to run through guys. Like he's really unique in that way. Where I almost compare him to like a Jalen Hurts, where like if he wanted to scramble more, he probably could. He just doesn't do it. Because he knows he's got those options. So I really like that things have come together from that side. Like I think there's a fit with what Notre Dame wants with Camden. And I think ultimately they saw that. Like after his most recent season, you know, he was really productive in Utah. He really kind of took a step forward with just like taking care of the ball. He was a little bit more consistent with just keeping the offense on track. And I think that progress from last season, or from 2 seasons ago to last season, kind of showed Notre Dame like, okay, this is a guy who could fit in this room and could add real value. And with all 3 of these guys, there's kind of an overlap of they're all pretty accurate, like much more accurate than Noah Grubbs was. They're more like Teddy Gerard. So they're all pretty accurate. They all have pretty good, for this stage of their career, ball placement, and they all have a pretty good sense of touch on the ball when they're trying to layer at different levels of defense. So from that side of things, there's some consistencies coming up between all 3 of these guys that I think we're seeing now. Notre Dame is really putting an emphasis on their appreciation of those traits.
Devin Davidson is another quarterback who got an offer from Notre Dame in the past few days. And with him, we know that Gino Guidugli made the trip down to see him throw in Florida before he actually extended that offer. We know that in-person evaluations carry a lot of weight in Guidugli's process, but considering Davidson isn't currently ranked among the top 400 players nationally, what stood out in that workout that led to the offer outside of the fact that he's listed at 6'6", 215?
Yeah, besides his giant status. You know, it goes back to the Elite 11 event where he was down in Miami. He won the accuracy challenge. He was named the alpha dog. Since then, his profile's exploded. Notre Dame booked the workout shortly thereafter. And in that workout, it was much the same. It was a lot of accuracy. It was a demonstrated ability to not only distribute the ball and, you know, keep the offense moving forward at a good clip, but to be able to do so with accuracy and provide those opportunities for run after the catch, to do so with, you know, a sense of, hey, here's my 1, here's my 2, here's my 3, and I kind of have an understanding of when I need to be looking off these things. I think he showed Notre Dame a really good command of the offense that they run down at Cardinal Mooney and kind of how he knows where to go with his eyes, and obviously the physical tools match. For Notre Dame, I mean, how often do you see 6'6", 6'6.5" quarterbacks who have a compact throwing motion and are accurate? Like, that's kind of crazy. Like, a lot of these guys who are bigger, I texted someone this yesterday, they throw like a trebuchet. So it's like a big winding motion, and you're not sure if it's going to hit the guy in stride, 40 yards downfield, or the water tower 6 blocks off, but it's going to go real far. He's not like that. His motion is tight, compact. Like he delivers with accuracy because he's mechanically supporting accuracy, which is very tough to do when you have extra large appendages swinging around. So I just think that Davidson has tools galore, and he has refined those tools to a point that are sort of a step above a lot of quarterbacks at his height and at his size. And I think Notre Dame sees that, kind of admires that. And they also obviously have that in with him, with Jared Clark being the head coach, Notre Dame tight end quarterback, and Elijah Golden, the former teammate, now a freshman. Like, I think they've heard enough on the character side about him, about the work he did to step into that starting role and win a state title as a first-year starter. Like, I think there's enough of an avenue for information there with the relationships that the workout validated the things that they had been hearing about him, his work ethic, and what he brought to the table. And ultimately, the offer came shortly thereafter, because as they continued to gather information, everything they were seeing and hearing lent itself to, this is a unique cat and kind of a unique quarterback prospect.
We'll be right back with Eric to dive into some of Notre Dame's biggest battles at wide receiver, offensive tackle, and on the defensive line. But before we get to that, I did want to remind you that you can get Locked On Irish ad-free with the Everydayer Club. Plus, you'll get access to the members-only Discord channel. Check it out at lockedonirish.supercast.com. Now, here's a quick word from our sponsors.
I'm Kalia Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball. And this is Mazda's women's basketball snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. It was a heavyweight showdown between number 3 South Carolina and number 7 LSU, and the Gamecocks rose to the occasion. South Carolina secured a hard-fought 79-72 victory to stay atop the SEC standings, using a balanced offensive attack to outlast the Tigers. Tessa Johnson led the way with 21 points, while Raven Johnson added 19. Medina Oka dominated the paint with a double-double, finishing with 12 points and 17 rebounds, while Joyce Edwards chipped in 10 points to round out the scoring. With the statement win, the Gamecocks now turn their attention to a road matchup at number 23 Alabama on Thursday. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
There's a couple other specific targets I want to ask you about. Let's talk about a couple wide receivers here. 4-star wide receiver Quentin Burrell has spent a good amount of time around Notre Dame, and as a highly touted wide receiver coming from the Chicago area, he feels like a major priority for Notre Dame in this class. So who are the current front runners for Burrell's commitment?
Yeah, that's been an interesting one. Like, we've talked about Michigan for a long time, and obviously they have some coaching stuff to deal with. So when I talked to Burrell at Battle 7-on-7, he mentioned like he's still interested in Michigan, but they do have kind of a same way Fact talked about Washington, right? They have kind of a reset because he has to build those relationships. Ohio State's been interested, but I'm not sure how hard they're pushing to make that one as much of a priority as some of these others. Indiana's been involved. There's a few other, Southeastern Conference schools. I would expect Notre Dame to be in this to the very end. I think Notre Dame and Indiana in particular are probably going to be in this thing, pushing to the very end. I could see schools like Alabama or other, Southeastern Conference schools that have made him a priority. I could see them, getting involved here, making a push. But I do think at the end of the day, he's going to stay in the Midwest. Those schools have been involved for a long time. They've been pushing for a while. And of those schools right now, it seems like Notre Dame has the most consistent offer for him, the most consistent landing spot for him. And he's been there a lot. He's getting back there, in April. So there's just a level of familiarity for him with Notre Dame that I think at this point surpasses schools like Michigan and schools like Indiana and things.
I think I buried the lead a little bit at wide receiver because Notre Dame is also very much in the mix for another 4-star wide receiver, but this one is a legacy prospect, and that is Julius Jones Jr. But Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks are pushing hard. So with another round of visits coming up this spring, how much ground does Notre Dame still need to make up to secure his commitment? Because this one is far from over, and it is not going to be a walk in the park for the Irish. There are several other suitors out there who also want Julius Jones Jr.
Yeah, I know Lloyd put out that update the other day, and it mentioned that, Oregon may even have a slight edge over Notre Dame at this point. I think that really those two are kind of head-to-head at the top, and it's just kind of at any given day who's ahead, right? It's just kind of moving back and forth like that. So I do think that Notre Dame, as of today, probably has a little bit of ground to make up with Oregon, but I still think that the Irish are in a good spot, and ultimately I feel good about their odds to land him for a couple of reasons. And one is Oregon has recruited quite a few guys with Jones's build, like a little bit of the smaller, dynamic, like they could play field slot receiver. Like that's kind of been the 5 stars that they were getting the last few years. Decoria Moore's kind of more in that build and things like that, and I think he's a little bigger than Julius. But they get a lot more of those like open field playmakers as opposed to the boundary. And Notre Dame could use a sort of next man up field playmaker. They have that opportunity, and obviously with the legacy side of things, they can sort of pitch and show like, hey, look, we have a great relationship. We know you would succeed here. We know you're a fit here, and look at the fit in our offense. I think that ultimately as they go through, that's going to be longer term, or that's going to be a hit longer term with him. But I know Florida's trying to get involved. Oregon is pushing super hard. I think the benefit here for Notre Dame is it seems that some staffs nationally have kind of held off going all in on Julius Jones because they feel that him ending up at Notre Dame is a foregone conclusion. And Oklahoma is the one I look at for that. Jones had a lot of interest in Oklahoma, and it didn't ever seem like they fully reciprocated it because I don't know that they thought the juice was worth the squeeze, regardless of how good he is, right? So with Oregon, they're obviously bought in. They're going to keep pushing. That is going to be the hard one. Florida's going to be there with them. But I just don't know that I see Julius going out to Eugene and making that, the commitment and signing with the Ducks at this point, as opposed to Notre Dame, who, even if they took a little bit longer to be on him than some fans would like he has that familiarity. And since they got on him, they have made it very clear that he's their number one priority. He's been number one on the Notre Dame board for longer than Oregon. He's been number one on the Notre Dame board and more present than for longer than Oregon. I just think that stuff is going to matter in the end.
On the offensive line, Leighton Von Brandt is a premier offensive tackle target, and the Irish have been considered one of the front runners, at least for a long time, although Florida appears to be gaining some momentum there as well. And now that it seems like they're out of the mix for five-star Mark Matthews, how important is it for Notre Dame to land Von Brandt to solidify the offensive line in this class, even though they have recruited on the offensive line really well in recent cycles?
Yeah, it's pretty important. Like, he and Cameron Wagner are kind of the top two guys at that position now. Notre Dame is still, technically involved with Kennedy Brown, the Indiana transplant in Texas, 5-star offensive tackle. I don't think they're going to get him. As you mentioned, Mark Matthews has sort of included Notre Dame in the conversation for a while, but it's never really felt like the Irish are the main players. So it's tough, right? Because I think that Leighton has emerged as the best option for a tackle alongside James Halter that's realistic. Cameron Wagner's right there. And then Albert Simeon's another guy that's pretty important, but he's listed as a tackle on some of the offer lists he has, but he's really an interior lineman. So once again, that kind of makes Leighton more important too, because with the class they just brought in, like 3-3, you want to make sure you're getting guys who project to tackle after you got a good haul of them in 25, but you got kind of a more interior heavy and probably interior translated focus in 2026. So I think he's pretty critical because he's one of the few guys who you look at and you're like, that's a tackle. That is bona fide. Like, he can play tackle. We think that that's going to be his fit. We don't have to worry too much about projection. Like, I think that that's going to be an important one for them. Wagner is also a true tackle. I feel really good about where they stand with him, but I think you need two of them because at this point, with the way the offensive line room has sort of developed and opened up, you're probably going to start to see the fallout of like class 2024, 2025 guys who aren't playing start to leave, right? And that's when those ranks narrow out. And for a guy like Von Brandt, who's just like a bona fide talent, can play tackle, can add to that unit, and who I see as like a really high upside. I know that there's been some concern about, where did Penn State stand with him when he decommitted or whatever? At least in the background, there's been questions about that. But like, you watch him on tape, this guy's a people mover, man. So I do think that he's pretty critical. I think he's a guy that they're going to want to push to land before the official visit cycle if they can. I don't know that that's going to happen, especially with Florida being a rising interest. But I do think that he's a guy that one of the guys they would like to get on board before the official visits and kind of have him in the circle of commits that are helping them recruit.
To your point about the offensive line, I was a little bit surprised that we didn't see more attrition in that room just because they've recruited so well and there's just a bunch of guys in that room, but only 5 guys can be on the field at once. Although I guess at Notre Dame, where they seemingly have a rash of injuries on the offensive line every single year, maybe more guys are going to be able to get on the field. But hopefully that's not the case in 2026. All right, I have 2 questions left. This one is focused on the defensive line. So at one point, it felt like Notre Dame had a real shot with 5-star edge rusher David DJ Jacobs, but now he's committed to Ohio State, although he did say he's going to take more visits. I don't know what's going on there, but either way, they're still in strong position with Zion Forstall, Abraham Cisse, 2 elite edge prospects, and they've been after Marcus Fakatu for a long time, ever since he reclassified into the class of 2027. I think Notre Dame made him an even bigger priority. He's one of the highest-ranked defensive linemen in the entire class. So when you look at those 3 guys, do you feel like Notre Dame needs to land 2 or maybe even all of them to sort of maintain that momentum that they have had on the defensive line, especially after last year when they added Ronnie Dunham, the 5-star, and Iwatade? Or do you think the board is deeper than most people realize and those guys are just the ones at the top?
It's a good question. I think if you want to maintain the momentum from a rankings perspective, you almost need to land, 2 of those guys. And I think that's just like a perception thing, right? When you land the kind of talents that he did last year, a 5-star, a guy who in Elijah Golden, who was a 5-star at one point, ended up dropping a little bit, but stayed a 4-star. Obviously, Iwatade is a highly ranked 4-star. Like when you have that level of just blue chip recruiting success at the position, it's going to take, those top ranked guys to feel like you're continuing to make momentum. So from a perception standpoint, I actually think that's a pretty apt way to put it. Like they do have to land 2 of those 3, and Fakatu is kind of an island of his own because he's been a target for like 2-3 years now almost. Like he's been so important to them. I do think that it's going to be an uphill battle to land Forstall, but they have probably as good a chance as anyone outside of Texas A&M to do so. It's just like it's going to be tough. He's a big time prospect. Everyone's going to be fighting for his look or for his talent. So I think that Notre Dame is well positioned there, but it's not going to be easy. It's not like it's, oh yeah, this is a match. It's Notre Dame's going to be right here. They'll probably be in it to the end. I don't know what it's going to take to push it over the edge at this point though. KJ Green's another guy who, if they land him, it's big time, but I think they're probably on the outside looking in a little bit for. But that said, he's going to get back on campus. We'll see if that changes. I do like where they stand with Cisse. I think that they have a good chance to land him and bring him in on that, as kind of like the Iwatade type, right? High end developmental edge rusher. I think Cisse is probably a little bit more advanced than Iwatade is coming into his senior year at this point, but just a really good prospect sort of in that blue chip range. And then the one I'll mention, like Marcus Fakatu, has been a little bit odd because obviously he's said a few times now since Washington's left that it reset things for him. And I've talked about that in this podcast, but I do still think Notre Dame is well positioned. Like I've been writing about how other schools have kind of angled out Notre Dame here recently. And I guess to own my own reporting a little bit, like, yes, that is the case, but there is a little bit of like prisoner of the moment to that, where it's like, this is what's happening right now. But recruiting is not necessarily about what's happening right now. It's about what happens between now and when he makes his commitment. And it's clear that Charlie Partridge impressed Fakatu and his family. It's clear that they have a great relationship with Nick Sebastian as well, and that's continuing. And I think that for as much as we've talked about and reported, like this thing is kind of looking like it's trending away from Notre Dame or other schools are trending up, I ultimately do expect Notre Dame to stabilize and continue to be right there amongst the top schools, especially as they get him back this spring. So he's kind of the big one there for me in what you mentioned. Like I think between Forstall and Cisse, like Forstall and Cisse, excuse me, as long as they land one of the two, which I feel good that they will, and Fakatu, like they're in a good spot to make this.
Yeah, that'd be huge.
One, but the key is Fakatu himself. Like Forstall might be a higher ranked player, but like the size, the presence on the interior line, the amount of resources and time that Notre Dame has put into this, like that's got to be the one you circle. Is like if we're going to take this thing from this is awesome to like this is elite, it's him.
Yeah, and he's the type of prospect that Notre Dame has missed far too often on the recruiting trail. Like they've been able to land some big time edge rushers, but the really highly touted guy on the interior that they want more than everyone, they just haven't been able to land, but maybe that'll be different in this cycle. All right, last one. As you zoom out and you look at everything that's happening right now in Notre Dame recruiting, what is the single most important storyline that you're going to be following most closely over the next couple of months, and why?
That's a good question. There's two. I had this one before. I'm still struggling to put it down. I think I've narrowed it down to two. So on the offensive side, it's quarterback, right? At the end of the day, we want to see what they're going to be able to do to replace Gerard. And I think that because I wrote about this a few weeks ago, like the way the quarterback model for Notre Dame has shifted. Like Noah Grubbs was kind of a unique cat in that he's like a low efficiency, high explosive. And then they've shifted pretty hard from that. And they're getting guys who look more like Gerard, guys who look like they can more sustain the sticks and things. I'm really curious what plays out there and how Notre Dame processes through how, who do we want from these three? How are we prioritizing these three? Like, I think that that's pretty important because not only is it going to set up this class with the quarterback, but I think it's informative for maybe a little bit of a shift in how they're prioritizing recruiting the position moving forward. And that's going to be a signal for a very loaded 2028 class of quarterbacks. So that one kind of just has me interested almost for the next group. And then on the defensive side, it's very easy to say defensive line, but honestly, I think I'll go with linebacker as kind of the one that's most interesting to me. They're having to reset the board. They have an elite talent already committed in Amari Irvin, but there's not a lot of clarity on where they're going to go from here. And I'm just so curious, like, what is the 2.0 version of this board going to look like? What is the off season going to look like with getting some of these guys on campus for visits, whether it's, older options that maybe just haven't been here in a minute, or if it's guys that they're getting in on altogether or blank sheets, new relationship. I'm just curious. Like there's a lot to come at this linebacker spot, and they have a clear advantage in their commitment, kind of getting out ahead, but it's just, I don't know, man. It's just a weird position where it's like I don't have a great sense of like what's the next step going to be, what's two steps going to be, and that makes it fascinating to me. There's clearly talent, there's options. Like I know Noah Glover, the 4-star linebacker, is high on him, and I haven't mentioned him throughout this podcast. Like I know that there are options, but it's interesting to see how it's going to all play out, especially because it doesn't seem like, I'm scrolling through the list now, like really none of these guys, other than maybe Glover, are in a position where it seems like they're moving their recruitment forward. Like they're all waiting to summer and they're all kind of taking their time. So there's time for Notre Dame to make moves too. Like it's just kind of an exciting position of like, what's next? So that's kind of the one I'm tracking at this point, I'd say.
Linebacker is also interesting because you can make the case it's the one position on defense that they haven't consistently done really well at. That's not to say they didn't add some big-time players like Matt Framo and Kingston Biliamo-Asa, but still I think as a whole, it hasn't quite been as good as some of the other positions on defense. So it's going to be a very interesting class this year. It always is. But Eric, this has been great as always. And you can read all of his work over at irishillustrated.com. And judging by what you've said today, man, it seems like it's about to be a very busy time for Notre Dame recruiting here shortly. And Eric is a great source on it all. So thanks again, man. We're going to do this again soon, I'm sure.
I appreciate it, brother. Always a pleasure.
All right, that is going to do it for this episode. Thank you again for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on YouTube, follow on your favorite podcast platform, like the video, and leave a rating or review. It helps us more than you know. And get those questions in for the Friday mailbag in the YouTube comments or on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. And if you never miss an episode, the Everyday or Club is built for you. Get Locked On Irish ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonirish.supercast.com to join the club. I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning. I'll see you then.